Hey everybody, it's Mama Kay coming back at you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And I'm so happy this person agreed to be interviewed today. I've known them, I think, for probably 2 decades anyways. And we met at the University of Manitoba when we were both music students there. And he was a part of quite the gaggle of saxophonists. I'm not quite sure what the actual term is for a gathering of saxophonists, but there were quite a number of fantastic players and very fun personalities. So without further ado, special guest, who are you?
I am Neil Watson, and I am a saxophone player here in Winnipeg.
Neil, besides playing saxophone, what gig are you doing that I'm specifically interested in you sharing about today?
For sure. For the last 8 years, I've been teaching a program called The Bridge, Music for Life. It was designed originally as a way to bring music instruction to students in the inner city who otherwise wouldn't have access to any music lessons of any kind.
And where do you run that out of?
Our home base has been Hugh John Macdonald School, really since its inception 8 years ago.
And was this your idea, or where did it come from? Because it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, this was originally a university-initiated project. I was at the school finishing up my master's degree at the time, and they were looking for somebody to run the program. And I didn't have anything sort of lined up for after I was, finishing my degree. And so I kind of jumped in, not having any idea what to expect.
And nobody had been doing this previously?
There was a flagship program that was run in this first year. I think there were 5 students that were involved. And then I took over in the second year, and we opened it up to everybody in the school. And we had probably 85 people in the room the first day that I walked in there. It was daunting. It's such a Hugh John Macdonald is an amazing school in a lot of ways. Primarily because so many Canadians who arrive in the country, their first school they go to is Hugh John Macdonald School. So we had kids from all over the world in that classroom that first day, which presents some very interesting challenges. Let me go into it. I'm going to go into it.
Please.
So the idea, this is my favorite story ever. The idea was we were going to run this like any other band program in the city. So the university gave me a room full of wind instruments and the Standard of Excellence band method book. And we set up just like we would any band class in any band room that you would see in the city. And I started trying to teach that way, but the giant barrier that we ran into was there were so many first languages spoken in that room that the students couldn't understand a word I was saying, and I couldn't understand them. So we had to teach music by doing rather than by talking about it. And along the way, I've come to think that that's the way we should be learning music.
Well, it's interesting, right? It's not that you had 2 language barriers happening. You had kids that didn't know how to read music, Western music, and you had kids that didn't know how to speak English.
Yes, exactly. And on top of that, kids who've never had an instrument in their hands before. So middle school kids trying to, put a saxophone around their neck, and it's big and it's heavy and it's clunky. They're staring at their band method book without any clue, what's going on. And I can't explain it. I can't talk about how to read the notes in the treble clef or the bass clef, or how many beats a half note gets, let alone how to play a B on their saxophone, right? So we kind of abandoned that approach out of sheer necessity and started learning by ear. And I remember we were trying to learn Merrily We Roll Along from the Standard of Excellence book, and it just sounded horrible. Like, it did not sound good. I could see them losing interest, and I totally got it. I mean, nothing sounded good. So once we abandoned that, we started working by ear. And it's interesting because CBC television was coming in to do an interview on this program that the university was offering, and they wanted to film the band. And I thought, oh my gosh, we cannot film Merrily We Roll Along. It doesn't sound good. We started working by ear on Superstition, Stevie Wonder, which is like 4 sharps. All the notes, if you're familiar with that horn line at all the notes are off the beat. Um,
Again, you have a room full of students
yes, that's right. And
that
so we
don't
just,
have any previous experience
that's
or
right. And
very
so
minimal.
the very minimal experience in most cases. And we started working on this horn line for Superstition, and really quickly, just I'd have somebody come in and illustrate how to play it on trumpet, and somebody would play it on trombone, and we would sit in this big circle. We would clap the rhythms, and very quickly they were able to play Superstition. And when CBC television came in, I think 6 weeks into the program, that's the song we played,
Holy
and
crow.
they sounded great. It's amazing. It's amazing what happens when middle school kids are all just listening to one another. And the cool thing, Joanne, is if the beat shifts a little bit, if somebody drops a beat somewhere here or there, I'll see my piano player look up over at the drummer and just adjust. Everybody just adjusts. And so there's this built-in safety net for all the music that we play. It's really cool.
Well, what a really natural way to learn, right? It's like learning any language when you're a baby, right? You're surrounded by people that are talking all the time. They're using big words. We don't know that as a baby, right? It's like
That's right.
they're not dumbing down their conversation just because there's a baby in the room.
That's right. And in so many instances with formal music education in this part of the world, we're trying to learn to read before we can speak. So my thinking is, if we can learn to speak the language and have some success on our instrument early, that is going to create an enthusiasm for being a musician, which is going to make learning to read down the road easier.
It takes a lot of the scary out of it, because when you have that built-in success, right? Like the kids are getting that, they're having that feel-good moment, they're having that shared joy experience, right? They're
That's right.
far more willing to take risks.
And as a band teacher, the value of getting a band together and performing on stage for an audience. My goal is to have them have success on stage in front of their peers, in front of their parents, in front of the community as quickly as possible. So if we take a horn line that's difficult, and I have my advanced students who can play it, I'll show my beginner students a much easier version of the same line. And as long as they play it in time with one another, they can get on stage very quickly and experience that the joy of performing in front of an audience, which in turn creates all kinds of enthusiasm for their instrument. And we've got our program is extracurricular. They don't get a course credit for it. They have to do extra work just to make sure they can come to our classes. And we have over 100 students that come check out the program just because they love music.
And then you get such a big buy-in from the families too, right? You get their kids on stage being successful and sounding great. You've got buy-in everywhere.
Absolutely. And then the really cool thing is, music is such a great means of bringing people together. So students from Syria and students from Africa and students from Tibet, First Nation students from here in Manitoba, all come together from these, such diverse backgrounds, but then we all kind of make music together and we're all part of this band. It's such a great, in some cases, such a great way of healing for students that are maybe coming from, war-torn parts of the planet and stuff. It's neat to see the power of music kind of on the front lines. And I mean, band teachers, we get to see that. We see what sort of power music has, and it really makes what we do worth it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So now, how many people do you have working with you in this program?
I've always had in the past one other person who comes in regularly. This year, it's been just me. And I've got some money set aside to bring in clinicians. And so I have a handful of clinicians who come in pretty regularly to work with the instruments that I'm not very good at, like the trumpets and the trombone players. And I'll bring in a guitar player. I'll bring in a singer. For anybody that's heard me sing, I'm sorry. Don't want to hear that. So I'll bring in a singer to work with my singers, and we sort of work the program that way. But I'm the only one that's there on a day-to-day basis.
So when you're choosing the people to come in and working with the kids, are you choosing people that are sort of more classically trained, or are you choosing people that are sort of more in the style of learning that you're wanting to foster?
For the most part, I'm bringing in jazz musicians that I know. So they're, you know, they're kind of a combination of both. They're
Right, right. They're
comfortable
learning a
using their
lot with that
ears.
oral tradition.
That's right. They're very comfortable in that tradition, and then they, they can also read. In some instances, what I'll do for my clinicians, especially where I've made up parts for songs that we're doing, is I have that written down,
Yeah.
and I'll pass that along to my clinicians so that when they come in, we can kind of hit the ground running.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Who, like, do you have regular people that you bring in? Would you mind saying who they are, or?
Absolutely. Phil Collins, a trumpet player here in Winnipeg, comes in quite regularly, and he's just great. Like, he's just so great with kids, and he's a great musician. He has listened to more music than I will listen to in my lifetime. So he comes in quite regularly. Todd Martin, who's a singer and a harmonica player and a wonderful brass player here in town. He was with me full time for the past 3 or 4 years. He comes in as a clinician this year. Guitarist Aaron Shore comes in quite regularly. Great guitar player. Haytha Forsyth, wonderful singer in town, comes in. She'll come in and do performances with the band too. So she's great. And she's another one who's just phenomenal with kids. Just a great teacher and a great musician. So we're fortunate in Winnipeg, Joanne, that there's so many amazing, wonderful musicians and human beings here in this city.
Yeah, we are indeed very rich. So
I
Neil,
agree.
I am so curious to hear what your musical journey was from when you were really little, because obviously you were inspired by some pretty fantastic people in order for you to have become who you are today, and to have that love of music. So can we go way, way back to baby Neil? How did it all
Sure.
start for you?
Baby Neil, well, I took piano lessons when I was quite young, and I took them all the way through elementary school. I can't say that I liked my lessons. Definitely my parents made me go, but I knew early on that I wanted to play the saxophone. I don't remember exactly when, but I knew I had eyes on middle school and playing the saxophone in the band. When I got into middle school, they wanted to put me on clarinet, but I was adamant that I should play the saxophone. And
What school was it, Neil?
I was at Oak Bank Middle School with Mrs. Crosby. She was Mrs. Taye then, and I'm very, very fortunate that she said, "Okay, you can play the saxophone." She's a clarinet player too, so.
Right.
But she let me play the saxophone, and I never really looked back. That was the instrument I knew I wanted to play. In fact, my grade 8 yearbook, where it says ambition, you know how it says ambition and then what's really going to happen? My ambition was to be a jazz saxophonist. In my grade 8 yearbook, I could show it to you. It's in here somewhere.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I knew early on that that's what I wanted to play. I knew I liked the saxophone. I knew I liked the jazz saxophone. My sort of journey into jazz, I think, came from originally the Police, which was a band that I really liked. And when they split up and Sting went solo, his first band had Branford Marsalis
Oh, I
in the
remember
group.
that. Yeah.
Oh, it was such an amazing band. The band was incredible. And so from there, I started checking out Branford Marsalis's music. And again, when I got his stuff, it was so far beyond my comprehension. But I just sort of kept sticking with it, and that would lead to another player and another player, and gradually I sort of branched out and learned that art form, and I'm still learning it now. I didn't take private lessons until I was in grade 12 on saxophone. So I had the piano background, but I didn't take any private lessons until I was in grade 12, and that was really just in preparation to go to university because I knew I wanted to study it.
Teacher?
My high school teacher was Rob Payne.
Okay, and so that was in Oak Bank as well?
That's right, Oak Bank, Springfield Collegiate.
Yeah.
And again, he was great. He had a motivated student in me for sure, but I really I spent most of my time, lunch hours and during break and all that kind of stuff. I would hang out in the band room. we had a circle of very talented musicians at Springfield Collegiate as well, many who've gone on, to be professionals in this city and others. Paul Balkane was a student there. He's a professional sax player here in Winnipeg. A great piano player named Scott McQuaid. Do you know Scott?
I know the name.
Okay, he's in I think he's in Ohio now. But he is, to this day, the most gifted musician I've ever heard. His ears were incredible. He could play anything he heard. And I had the privilege of sort of playing alongside him. And then when we got into university, he ended up playing the piano with the jazz band in university, even though he was in another faculty. He never studied music formally. He was just a gifted musician. So we had a lot of great players there, and the music program in high school was very inspiring.
So is that what pushed you to want to go into music education, or to go into music at least like for your music degree at U of M?
I think I always knew that was the direction I was going to go. That was never in question. I've been driven to music for whatever reason for a long, long time. But I think I've been fortunate along the way to have experiences that just kind of helped that along. And high school, definitely playing with those great players and having the band teachers that I did, that really helped push me towards studying at university.
Who did you study with privately? You said you took a year of lessons?
Yeah, in grade 12, I started studying with a classical saxophonist who was the saxophone instructor at the University of Manitoba. His name is Ross Ingstrup. Just a wonderful sort of French classical saxophonist. He's out, I think, in Victoria, BC now. I just called him. I saw he was the instructor at U of M, and I just called him, and I would go to his house on Wednesday nights, and we learned a few pieces in preparation for an audition into the Faculty of Music. And thank goodness I got accepted. You talked about that off the top of this interview, that there was a gaggle of saxophone players at that school at the time, and they were all, I was in awe of all of them. They were such fabulous musicians.
You guys were monsters. It was wild how
I knew I had my work cut out for me to keep up with them.
Yeah. So who was all part of that crew? Do you remember?
Yeah, in the first year, they accepted 4 of us in the first year program, and I became close friends with all of them. Christian Popple, who's a band teacher in Winnipeg, Chad Pollard, who's also teaching band, and Derek Zylstra was the third one. Oh. Derek is a music director at a church, and we talk about very naturally gifted musicians. You know as well as I do, Derek is incredible.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. You guys were just as much, you were, how do I say this? As gifted as you were as musicians, you were gifted as fun human beings. You were a joy to be around, and perhaps some mischief was also made.
I'm going to blame Derek Zylstra for all of that.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. So now you're in university. You got your, did you end up with a performance degree? Did you end up with a general degree? What did you end up with?
It was a performance degree, a Bachelor of Music in saxophone performance. It was all classical and all sort of that French classical tradition, which is beautiful, beautiful music, and also very technical and very challenging. And I don't regret any of that, but there wasn't a lot of work for me as a French classical saxophonist coming out of the U of M. So eventually, I started studying again with a number of different players. I studied with Sasha Boychuk, who's in Toronto now, a great saxophonist and clarinet player from Moscow originally. And then I studied a little bit with Mike Murley, who's a very famous tenor saxophonist in Toronto. And I studied with Greg Gation, who teaches out at Brandon University. I would drive out to Brandon every couple of weeks for lessons with him. And that was all in preparation to go get a master's degree, this time with sort of a jazz emphasis. And that's kind of where my career has taken me since.
Yeah, I dare say there are in Winnipeg for sure many more opportunities to play out, right, when you're a jazz musician.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, it's some of the great jazz players that I know are also, they also studied classical saxophone when they were in university. And so you know, music is music, right? It all ties together.
Now we have to go down potentially dark path. Neil,
Hmm.
it's the question that stumps everybody. And of course, I have to give the disclaimer every single time that it is a family show. So
Fair
we need
enough.
to remember that.
Okay.
So Neil, what would you say would be one of the weirdest gigs or jobs that you have ever been involved in?
I will say I have been thinking about this for a couple of days now, knowing that this question was coming. And I thank you for the heads up on this, because if you'd asked me off the top, I would have struggled, because a lot of the weird gigs that I can think of are usually, you know, I remember one time a restaurant wanted me to play just solo saxophone and wander from table to table, you know, kind of play. I thought, wow, that's going to be horrible. But I did it. And it was tricky and challenging. And, you know, people don't generally want the bell of a saxophone sitting beside them while they're trying to eat dinner. You know, and then other gigs that sort of ended up being weird were just sort of because of organizational things. I remember doing a New Year's gig once where dinner went so late that we ended up playing one song before midnight, and then we played Old Lang Syne, and then everybody went home. And I think we played until about 20 past 12, and we all packed up, and we played 3 or 4 songs the whole night. So little things like that. But the winner, the far and away winner, was a gig we played out in Lake Country years and years ago. And I'm not going to name the band, and I'm not going to name the musicians in the band, but this is what happened. We were playing this gig. It was just in a bar, and the crowd, you know, it was a drinking crowd, and they were getting a little bit rowdy. And unbeknownst to me, in the second set break, the drummer had gotten into an argument with somebody who was just listening and drinking and dancing. And we got back on stage and we played our last set. And I guess this guy just sat in the back and kind of stewed about this. As we were playing our last song, I looked up and I saw like this bowling ball shaped guy charging the stage, full out charging the stage. And I tell you, Joanne, I was graceful. I grabbed my saxophones and I spun out of the way as this guy sailed past me, launched himself into the drums. The drums went flying in every direction like bowling pins. The gig ended right there. Everybody sort of jumped on this guy and pulled him off of the drummer. He just, and here's the great thing about this gig. We were supposed, it was, you know, it was a few hours away. We were supposed to stay overnight. The drummer said, there is no way I'm staying overnight, you know, in this lonely lake cottage with this guy out there. So we drove home that night. It was about 5 a.m. by the time we got home. And that, to this day, that is the most legendary gig I have ever played.
Wow.
Shocking end to a rowdy night.
Great visuals. Great visuals.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
It was.
wow. I can't, you know what? I'll get the details about that after our interview. I am so curious. Wow. Good
Fair
for
enough.
you. I love it. You very calmly took your instruments.
Yeah. Now I feel bad because I could have stopped this guy, I suppose. But I will admit, my first concern was for my tenor and my alto saxophone, which were
You
sitting
got
on
to
the
take
floor.
care of the baby.
Just, yeah, it was very fluid. It was like I was like Bruce Lee, only I didn't throw a kick. I just sort of got out of the way, and it was surreal. To this day, it's surreal. Poor drummer. I feel so bad for him.
That is awesome.
He was just as surprised. He just looked out. He's drumming, and he just sees this guy come towards him. Oh my goodness.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now that you've scared off the children of taking any gigs like that, do you have any advice for anybody who might be thinking about going into music as a career?
Sure. I have a few things. I would say if you're going to take on music as a career, be prepared for your paycheck to come from a bunch of different places. You're going to teach you're going to perform, you're going to write music, you're going to do all kinds of different things, and rather than collecting, you know, a salary from any one place, bits and pieces are going to come in from all over the place, and that can work. That can work, and it's exciting, and it's a lot of fun. But you want to be as versatile as you can be. You want to be able to do as many different things because it makes you hard. For the vast majority of us, right? For the vast majority of musicians, we're not going to be rich, but we can make a comfortable living as long as we're prepared to tackle a bunch of different projects, which is exciting and fun and creative, and you know, every day getting up and going to work is something different, right? You might be writing a chart for a big band or working on a string quartet piece. Maybe it's a practice day. Maybe you're working on your doubling, so you're practicing your flute or your clarinet if you're a saxophone player. Maybe you're teaching, maybe you're doing a clinic, maybe you're working with a big band out at a band camp somewhere. There's all kinds of different things, and it's always different and it's always fun, but you want to be ready for that. That's my sort of be prepared for music as a career advice. My prepare as a musician advice is especially now, if you're just, you know, starting to dive into it seriously, listen to as many different great musicians as you can. We live in this amazing time where we have access to virtually every single recording at the click of a button. You want to listen and you want to imitate, and you take a little piece of one player and a little piece of another player, and it's just going to branch out, and gradually all those things come together and become you. And that is something that you want to tackle now.
When you were growing up and again first starting to listen to, who would you say like your top 3 people that you listen to would be to try and emulate their sounds?
As a saxophone player specifically?
Yes, as a saxophonist.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, as I was saying earlier on, Branford Marsalis was kind of my introduction into the jazz world. Right. And that sort of branched off to a bunch of different players. I heard that, you know, we should all listen to Charlie Parker. So I started listening to Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker's tricky at first because he was recording in the 40s and the early 1950s. The recording quality sometimes isn't great, but the stuff he's playing is unbelievable. So, you know, if you're a saxophone player, Charlie Parker's so worth listening to. The first record that I got that had it been on vinyl, I would have worn out the grooves, was a great tenor saxophonist named Joshua Redman. That was, to me, that was music that was super accessible and still technically unbelievable. And every single listen to a Joshua Redman record, you hear new things that are going on, interactions between the different musicians and stuff. So I would check him out just because you're going to love it. I was through all these musicians, somebody said you should listen to John Coltrane. John Coltrane is a double-edged sword, in my opinion, and I'm gonna annoy people who are super into John Coltrane. But if you make the mistake of getting John Coltrane's music late in his career, he was off in a different direction. And to this day, I'm not sure I understand what he was doing. But if you find the right record, it's beautiful to listen to. So everyone will say, go out and get Giant Steps, which is the sort of probably the quintessential John Coltrane record. It was the first one that I got. I got it on vinyl just over here. I hated that record when I first heard it. There's too much happening. I don't understand it. But if you get, say, John Coltrane and Duke Ellington, or John Coltrane's Ballads record, those are just beautiful. You can just appreciate the beauty of those records. You don't need to dive into the science behind what he was playing there. So there's 3 names for you: John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Joshua Redman.
And how about in regards to classical saxophone? Who are good people to, even 1 or 2?
Yeah, that's I'm not the one to ask about classical saxophone. When I was going to school in the early 90s, we were all listening to a great alto saxophonist from Bordeaux, France, named Jean-Marie Landex. You know
Yes.
that name? I'm sure you know
Yes.
that
I
name.
remember when he came to the U of
Came
M.
to win, yeah. And he was always the player that I emulated. And yes, when he came and played in Winnipeg, oh gosh, what was that, 1996 or 97?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it
Maybe
was,
even a little earlier.
it might have been. He was unbelievable. If you can track down recordings of Landex, it's really fun to hear that sort of French style of playing. Outside of that, my recommendation would be to look to other parts of the world for classical saxophone players. If you look to maybe classical saxophonists from Russia, there was a different concept going on there. So I always, this is what I always think when I listen to the French players, that they're sort of making their saxophone sound as pretty as possible. It's almost like listening to an oboe. But when you listen to some of these, Russian saxophonists, or even some American classical saxophonists, it seems to me that they're trying to imitate a cello. That they're trying to sound more like a cello than an oboe. So there's very different concepts in sound, and it's worth sort of checking that out too.
Do you notice that when you were listening to Sasha play?
I did, and Sasha would talk about it too.
Okay.
That was kind of his thinking, and it was noticeable right away. We can get really technical about this if you want, but when you think of French vibrato as an example, right. It's a very narrow, faster vibrato than it is if you listen to. Yes, that's right. And some other parts of the world, the vibrato is much wider, and it goes from being sort of underneath the pitch to being a little bit above the pitch. Like it's a wider vibrato with the center of the pitch kind of right in between the vibrato. So again, the point here is just to experience as many different sounds as possible so that you can formulate who it is you're going to be.
I am definitely going to be listening to some Russian saxophonists today.
Yeah, check it out. See what you can find.
So now to wrap things up, these are weird times indeed, as we said. What's some worldly advice that you have, maybe that's been helpful to you to sort of navigate through these
these times in particular?
Yeah.
Well, all right. For these times in particular, especially now where I'm not sure when we'll have the opportunity to play in front of a live audience again, I'm trying to use this time as effectively as possible for sort of personal growth. So the first thing I did was I wrote a big band chart, original composition, start to finish, and I tried a couple of neat little orchestration techniques that I sort of had in my head, and I'm not sure if it'll work. It's sitting, it's ready to go. I think the Winnipeg Jazz Orchestra will perform it in October if all goes according to plan. We'll see. But there was a few things that I wanted to work on. I wanted to write a full course of saxophones solely, for example, which I hadn't really done before. And then I wanted to have a big Thad Jones-esque brass shout chorus. And so I tried that in this tune, sort of working on that at the same time as I was working through this great book called Inside the Score, sort of putting some of that to practice. Getting my saxophone out again and playing seriously every day. I haven't had a chance to do that in a long time. So I'm trying to stay as razor sharp as I possibly can be so that when we finally do get going again, I can hit the ground running. That's, sort of my advice for these times that we live in right now, especially for those of us that don't have a whole lot. The usual stuff's not going on, right? So normally, we'd be taking the kids to volleyball and to soccer practice and to music lessons and swimming lessons. We would have performances. I'd be gearing up for the Manitoba High School Honor Band. All these things would be going on. Without that happening, without that structure, keeping some kind of structure is really important.
Right. It's nice that you've got those goals set for yourself, right? Those personal goals every single day. You know that, okay, I can check this off. I've done this. I have had that success.
For me, anyway, I find that really important, is to have that some sort of structure in a kind of structureless world.
Yeah, no, I hear you absolutely. That's I have my list every day. What am I going to
Good.
get done today? And it just to feel that little bit of accomplishment, it helps a lot.
I agree completely. My last little bit of worldly advice, and this might have tied into what am I thinking for people that want to become musicians? Um, I asked Nick Payton, great trumpet player, years ago, what he looks for when he's hiring, say, a saxophone player to be in his band. And he said he wants somebody who's going to be nice, somebody who's going to show up on time, and somebody who's going to dress appropriately. So it's funny, those three things, none of them have to do with playing.
Oh.
So he's not looking for the best player. He's looking for somebody he can work with and get along with, who's going to be at the gig.
Yeah,
So that would be sort of worldly advice to think
I
about.
love that. And you know what? That goes for pretty much everything.
It really does. Yeah, it really does. I agree.
Again, you can tick those boxes. You're ahead of many people.
Well, thank you, Joanne.
Thank you so much for taking time today. It's been great to catch up with you.
It has
I
been.
can't wait to hear your other stories that we're going to share off camera about some of your other gigs. Thank you for coming in this past year too and helping out us get our saxophones going too as well. We can't thank you enough.
Once you're back up and running again, anytime. It's so much fun. I sure miss that right now. I miss rolling up my sleeves and working with all the kids.
Yeah, I hear you. Neil, have an amazing rest of your day, and thank you so much again for taking time.
Thank you, Joanne.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye.